Lunchbreak for nurses, gather round. Voices sharing, safe and sound.
Hey nurses, welcome back to Lunchbreak for Nurses, and whether you're eating at your desk, hiding in the break room, or actually taking a real lunch break today, good for you. You've earned it. Today we're going somewhere heavy but important. We're talking about nurses in modern war, and specifically what it does to the mind and the soul. Not the clinical stuff, not the blast injuries or the triage protocols. We're going to talk about what happens inside a nurse when the system breaks down, when you can't save everyone, when the rules you trained by don't apply anymore. We're talking about moral injury. What is moral injury? Most of us have heard of PTSD. But moral injury is different, and nurses need to know the distinction. PTSD is about fear. It's the nervous system stuck in survival mode. Moral injury is about conscience. It's what happens when you are forced to act or prevented from acting in a way that violates your deepest values. Dr. Jonathan Shea, who coined the term, described it as a betrayal of what's right by someone in authority, or by impossible circumstances. For nurses in war zones, that can look like having to choose which patient gets the last ventilator, watching a child die because the supply convoy didn't make it through, providing care to a combatant when civilians are still waiting outside, being told to evacuate a facility you know still has patients in it. These aren't mistakes. These aren't failures of skill. These are situations where there was no right answer, and nurses carry that weight anyway. What's happening? Right now. This isn't abstract. This is happening right now. A study published in Scientific Reports in 2025 looked at Palestinian nurses still working in Gaza during the conflict. The rates of post-traumatic stress symptoms were severe, and the quality of life scores were among the lowest ever recorded in frontline healthcare workers. In Ukraine, MSF teams are sleeping in hospital basements kilometers from the front line, rotating every 2 weeks because the psychological load is that intense. They do not leave the building during their rotation. That is their world for 2 weeks, and in both conflicts, a peer-to-peer mental health model, nurse supporting nurse, showed real benefit, but uptake was low. Because stigma is still real, even in a war zone, even when everyone around you is suffering. That tells you something about how deep that stigma runs in our profession. It's not just war zones now. You might be thinking, I'm not a war nurse. This doesn't apply to me. But here's the thing. Moral injury lives in your hospital too. Every nurse who has been understaffed and watched a patient deteriorate, that's moral injury territory. Every nurse who documented something they were told to document differently, moral injury. Every nurse who followed a policy they knew was wrong because they couldn't fight it alone, moral injury. The war zone just turns up the volume to a level that's impossible to ignore, but the mechanism is the same. Researcher Judy Rushton describes moral distress as knowing the right thing to do and being unable to do it. Sound familiar? We didn't get into nursing to ration care. We got in to give care. When that's taken from us, by circumstance, by administration, by conflict, something breaks. What actually helps? So what do we do with this? Number 1, name it. There is a difference between being tired and being morally injured. Knowing the word matters. It helps you understand why the usual self-care stuff, bubble baths and gratitude journals, doesn't touch it. Number 2, peer support works. The research from the Israel-Hamas conflict showed nurse-to-nurse mental health conversations made a measurable difference. Not therapy necessarily, just another nurse who gets it saying, "That was an impossible situation, you did what you could." Number 3, don't pathologize the response. Moral injury is not a disorder, it's a normal response to an abnormal situation. The injury isn't in you, it's in what happened to you. Number 4, if you are struggling, please find a therapist who understands healthcare workers. Not all therapists do. Look for someone trained in moral injury specifically or in occupational trauma. Since February 28, 2026, the U.S. and Israel have been engaged in a war with Iran, initiated when U.S. and Israeli forces launched airstrikes targeting Iranian military and government sites. The U.S. has an estimated 50,000 service members deployed in and around the Middle East, including troops that are usually ground invaders. Every branch of the military has a nurse corps, and in a conflict of this scale, they are all activated. The Army Nurse Corps, the oldest from the year 1901, deploys with combat support hospitals, forward surgical teams. Army nurses are the most likely to be near any ground operations, embedded with combat units and trauma teams. The 82nd Airborne units now in the region would have Army medical personnel attached. The Navy Nurse Corps operates aboard carrier strike groups and hospital ships. With the 3 carrier groups in the region, Navy nurses are already there. Hospital ships like the USNS Comfort and Mercy can be surged for mass casualty support. The Air Force Nurse Corps staffs the aeromedical evacuation system, the critical link moving casualties from theater back to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany and then to the United States. Air Force nurses manage patients in flight on C-17s configured as flying ICUs. Given the air-dominant nature of this conflict so far, aeromedical evac nurses are heavily involved. The Marine Corps does not have its own nurse corps, but the Marine units are supported by Navy medical personnel, including nurses, which is why the USS Tripoli deployment matters medically. What the nursing role looks like in this specific conflict. The injury patterns from this conflict are likely similar to what the research described from Gaza: blast injuries, burns, shrapnel, and traumatic amputations, but potentially at much higher volume given Iranian ballistic missile capability. During the June 2025 strikes, Iranian ballistic missiles targeted Al Udeid Air Base, CENTCOM's forward headquarters, with one impacting the base and damaging a radome, meaning U.S. medical personnel at forward bases are themselves in the target zone. The moral injury dimension becomes especially acute here. Nurses at forward bases treating both U.S. casualties and potentially Iranian civilians or combatants under missile threat, with crisis standards of care in effect. What we have just described in this episode is happening right now to real colleagues. Nurses in war zones are our colleagues. They're doing the same job we do, in conditions most of us cannot imagine, and the psychological toll they carry deserves to be talked about openly, without shame. If this episode hit close to home, whether you've deployed or whether you just recognized yourself, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment, send a message, and if you're on your lunch break right now, actually breathe for the next few minutes. You're allowed. We care about you. Thanks for listening to Lunch Break for Nurses. Share this one with a colleague who needs it, and please like and subscribe.